There are plenty of Doctor Who stories, both classic series and modern series, that are often in contention for worst episode ever. One of those stories that frequently comes up is Underworld, the Tom Baker story, and it's often seen not only as the low point of Tom Baker's 7-year stint as the Doctor, but also one of the low points of classic Who and just Doctor Who in general. And as you may know from my community posts, I've been going on a bit of a marathon. I've been trying to watch every single Tom Baker story from Robot to Legopolis, and I had the great misfortune of watching this story for the very first time, actually. I've never seen it before now. There's a reason I never actively went out and sought out the story, because it is quite possibly the worst classic story I have seen in recent memory. I'd rather rewatch Revenge of the Sidemen 100 times over than rewatch this crap again. Actually, scratch that. I'd rather rewatch this, and if you know me, that's saying a lot. So, the plot of Underworld. So the Doctor, Leela and K9 land on this spaceship, and there's a crew, and they go past like a nebula or something, and then they're on this planet, and they like run around some caves for a bit, and there's these Minyan things, not the Despicable Me minions, but the Minyans, and they want like their race back something, and the people on the ship, they want them or something, and then like the Minyans really hate the Time Lords because they basically destroyed their race or something like that. I can't remember. I really can't remember because it was that dire that I can't remember the plot. This story is sort of a kind of reappropriation of Greek mythology, but in space, and it's like a sci-fi reworking of Jason and the Argonauts, for example. But aside from a throwaway line by the Doctor at the end of Part 4, again, this does not come through, right? This really doesn't come through. The little potential that the story has really just doesn't come through at all. Okay, now to start off with, obviously, the first episode, it doesn't start off abysmally. It's just kind of a run-of-the-mill bad Doctor episode with particularly weak acting from the cast because they just seem completely bored, and it's just kind of your run-of-the-mill generic Doctor Who episode. And also as well, the writing for the leads, especially Leela, seems really off, and the characters just don't feel right and like themselves, which is a shame because I do genuinely really like Leela as a companion. I really, think she's a really good companion. Now, these weak elements in Part 1, which aren't, abysmal, they're still carried over through the rest of the story. The cast do not give a crap. And you know what? I probably wouldn't blame them if I was in this story. The writing and the story does not come through. And the main killer from Parts 2, 3 and 4 onwards, that's over an hour's worth of screen time, is the visual effects. Now, I get it. This was 1977 on a BBC budget. I'm not expecting it to be, amazing. But this story used a hell of a lot of blue screen, or colour separation overlay, CSO. Basically, a primitive blue screen. And at the time, that wasn't really possible, at least to do effectively, right? So for most of the story, you've just got the Doctor, Leela and the guest cast running around ugly, computer-generated caves for what feels like an eternity. And it's just dire to watch. Slight little detour, but this is an important point. Season 15, the season that this story's from, is my least favourite from the Tom Baker era, mainly because, aside from maybe the Sunmakers, it doesn't feel like the Graham Williams era has really come into its own. It's either an awkward hangover from the gothic horror days of Philip Hinchcliffe's era, or more egregiously, it's trying to compete with the success of Star Wars, the kind of spectacle, which obviously Star Wars came out in the build-up to Season 15 in 1977, but, that's a Hollywood film with millions of dollars to spare. This does not. And as well, you've got to think, in the late 70s in Britain, there was inflation and, a lot of industrial action as well, which would affect the budget, and, you can't do all of this ambitious stuff, but the production team seemed to have the opposite view. It's like the ambition was just stretched like an elastic band, and it was like ready to snap, and it just doesn't work. Historically, Doctor Who's strong point isn't always the spectacle, but when they try and emphasise that too much, like in this season, as I've mentioned, not just this story, but The Invisible Enemy is guilty of that, The Invasion of Time is guilty of that, but when you put so much emphasis on the spectacle, it has a knock-on effect on such things like story and characters and themes and whatnot. In this case, the story and the concepts and ideas just don't come through to the audience. I can't remember a single character's name. The villains, they've got some history with the Time Lords and I hate them. That never comes through properly, and I just don't feel anything. And as a result, it's an absolute slog to get through, and it's just an eyesore to watch. It's an absolute eyesore. This issue isn't exclusive to TV. I mean, in any medium, if you rely too much on spectacle, it has a detriment. I mean, theatre, I can speak from experience. When you focus too much on, say, like, technical aspects, like sets and moving all the sets, you want to have a very big elaborate set, and you've got to move everything off and on and off stage and whatnot. It can genuinely have a knock-on effect on the performances, which is, in theatre, the key component of it all, because you're eating away time in rehearsals to plotting where the set's going to go and how you get it on and off and whatnot, and it eats away time, so the actors don't have quite as much time to really develop their performance and whatnot. And I think that's a case with anything, and it's something you, as a creative and working on a production like this, whether it is a theatre production or TV production, you've always got to be wary of that. I can't believe how little I got out of this video and out of this episode, because there's nothing to talk about with Underworld. It's the most boring Doctor Who story ever. It's like the modern Saranga conundrum, for God's sake. 1 out of 10. It's just one of the worst classic stories and one of the worst Doctor Who stories I've ever seen. And it nearly sent me into a bloody coma by part 2, let alone part 4.